Hi, I'm Teresa from Phoenix Gate Crafts, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about alternative forms of blocking. So I did a video a couple years ago, not a great video, but I'm going to link it just in case, and it goes into a little bit more detail about how to properly block a garment or an item. The problem was, at that time, I was pretty much only doing doilies because I wasn't knitting very much. So I wasn't using very much in the way of natural fibers, and the way you block natural fibers is different than the way you block cotton or acrylic. So I basically describe how to block a cotton doily, and I don't think I got into too much else with that. The problem is, you're not going to be able to necessarily block properly if you're in a small space like an apartment or a half a duplex, or you just have a very small house. I know that, if you want to block a blanket, for example, a lot of recommendation is to, wash it or just get it damp, wring it out as best you can. It's very big, so you can't do a very good job at that. And then lay it over a bed. The problem is if the only bed you have is the one you sleep in and you do this too late, you're going to be going to bed in a wet bed. So that's not a good idea. So let's get back to acrylic. There's two methods basically to block acrylic, just so we have a nice friendly starting point. You either need to steam it using either the steam setting on your iron or a bona fide steamer machine. This gives warm water into the fabric, but don't iron directly on it because you will melt the acrylic and it'll become too flat. Because you still want the stitch definition, you just want it to lay better. You don't want to smoosh the stitches. And then you can lay it out on blocking mats if you have the proper thing. You can also use foam puzzle mats for kids if you don't, or you can just use towels or blankets if you don't have any of that stuff. That's what I do. I have towels. Anyway, then you can pin it to measurements and you let it fully dry, pick it up, and it is now officially blocked and ready to use. The problem with acrylic is that despite common belief that you block one time, because acrylic is artificial, you can wash it and it'll kind of crumple up again, so you'll need to lay it flat. There is a cheating method for this, by the way. So basically, go to your washer and your dryer and wash it and dry it on a cool to warm setting. I recommend cool, but if you don't have cool, at least something that's warm and not hot. And then pull it from the dryer right away and just kind of lay it out so that it cools in a flat position. You're not pinning it, you're not getting it to measurements, you're just making it smoother. And the cool thing with this is you can stack items in this way and they'll turn out good enough. It's not done to measurements, but it is, at least fixing some of the stitch tension issues. If you do this every single time, the items are good enough to give away, especially if you're not really having any tension issues in your work. And just like acrylic, there are two methods of wet blocking items that are made from wool or other animal fibers. The proper method is to get it soaking for 15 minutes. I like to wash at this point because, so in processing wool, they do wash the wool and get it up to a boiling temperature to kill any germs. And they agitate it just enough to get any fecal matter or vegetable matter out of the wool because, it's coming from a live animal. So it's sanitized. So that way when they process it, you're not getting anything gunky and yucky and all that yarn. And then it takes a heating process to dye the yarn as well. So that gets it up to nearly a boil as well. Definitely high enough to kill germs. So at that point, you've got sanitized yarn and you're fine. The problem is after that, they're processing it. They might drop it. People are using their hands to touch it and getting oils from their fingers onto the yarn and dirt as a result. Then as they're packaging it, they're sending it to a warehouse, which might then send it to a different warehouse for the particular retailer. So like if you're buying it, so they're going to send it to a warehouse that's then going to distribute it to other warehouses for, the main warehouse, and then they're going to send it to, say, Michael's or Joann's or your LYS, and they might have a warehouse for easy distribution. I know Amazon does. And then from there, it'll get shipped to a specific store where you can then, they're going to do what's called breaking bulk, which is basically splitting up the giant box into smaller units, usually one per customer, so that you can grab, feel. A lot of people, for some reason, really like punching their face with their new yarn balls to test how soft it is, to see if it's something that'll be comfortable around a neck. So yay, people are breathing on it. Not so bad since COVID, I've noticed, but still that was a very popular thing to do. But they're handling it, they're putting it back. They're, somebody else is picking it up, maybe putting it back before you get a chance to do it. It could be dropped on the floor at any stage in this entire thing. And so at this point, it's just dirty because of handling. So I like to wash it before I use it for the first time. Just because, I'm a little paranoid and I don't want germs, but you can also do it just because, you don't want other people's fingerprints on your yarn. Not to mention, if you have pets and that cat just loves sitting on the yarn, you never know what they've been walking in. So anyway, I do wash, and there's a couple different ways to wash it by hand. Some are machine washable, some are not. If it's superwash, machine washing is good idea, in which case you can wash and block it very similarly to the way I described acrylic. But if you're going to do the hand washing, you can use Eucalan, soak, or pretty much anything that's a leave-in soap, the way those two are. They're slightly different formulas with slightly different scents, but they pretty much work the same way. Basically, you take your basin. This is what I'm talking about, just a basic sink basin. And you about half fill it with water with just a little dribble of the soak in. It's technically supposed to be 1 tablespoon of your washing soap in about a gallon of water, but I'm not measuring any of that as it's coming out of my faucet. So a little dribble, less is honestly more for this. And you get it about halfway full, and then you stick your items in. And yes, you can only do a certain amount with this amount of liquid in this size of a basin. If you have a bigger basin, you can do more. Just, alter your measurements accordingly. And you stick your garments in and kind of move them around very gently so you're not felting, but just so that they can get fully soaked in the liquid. You want to make sure that the liquid covers and that you've combined the liquid with the dish soap sufficiently that the soap is being soaked into the garment. Hence why one of them is called soak. Anyway, then you let it soak for about 15 minutes or so. Then you squeeze it out as best you can. There's several different methods to do this. If you have a spin dryer, you're in the best of luck. No heat or anything to actually dry it, but it gets the most water out using centrifugal force. If you don't have that, you can use a salad spinner. But if you're like me and you don't have either of those, you can take a towel, lay it out, lay your garment out on top of it flat, and start rolling it up like a jelly roll. And use your hands and knees to apply pressure and weight to soak out as much liquid from the garment into the towel as possible. Then you transfer that garment onto your blocking mats if you have them, or whatever you're using. I use towels, and you pin to measurements. That is a great way to get it to fit something perfectly. However, you only have to do this once to measurements, and then it's usually pretty okay. Or if you're like me and the measurements aren't the important thing because things tend to stretch to fit over your body, like socks, this didn't really need to be fit to measurements. It just needed to be big enough to go around my neck. So I didn't do it to measurements for here. And you know, for future washings, you don't have to block it every single time. That's a big to-do. Instead, you can do something a little bit more like what I do, which is very modular use of towels. You can set your towels in any arrangement you need to fit your items. And you lay them out flat so they look nice, but you're not necessarily pinning and blocking. This is considered a very light form of blocking. And I find it's usually sufficient to get things into the general shape you need them so that they lie their best as they're being used or worn. Now, if you're like me, I live in half of a duplex. I do not have a lot of floor space. I don't want stuff on my bed because if I do that, I'm going to wind up sleeping in a wet bed because it takes extra long to dry multiple layers that soak the water out of the thing you're blocking. So what do I do instead? Well, if you can't block out horizontally, you can block vertically. Now, a couple caveats with this. One, if you want to hang things outside or block them outside, if you're using any hand-dyed yarns, it's best practice to keep them out of the sun. A lot of dyes are not sun safe or not light resistant or light proof. Basically, a lot of colors fade in sunlight. I know that my form of dyeing with food coloring, the times that it does fade is if you put it out in the sun for extended periods of time, and it fades even faster if it's wet at the same time. So if you are going to do any blocking outside, make sure it's in a fully shaded area for the entire time that you're letting it dry. Yes, it'll dry a lot faster out there, but even if you get sun dapples, you can find that you've got patches that might be faded. Also, if you're blocking vertically, be careful how you hang things, because if, for example, you've got a sweater and you've decided to hang it on a hanger, it's going to really stretch in the shoulders and underarms area and not so much in the sleeves or the bodice, because you're not only factoring in the weight of the yarn, which can be several hundred grams of yarn, you're also factoring in the weight of the water, and it's going to be dripping down. So it's going to really stretch in the shoulders where all the weight is concentrated, and it's not going to block out the arms. So unless you're willing to wear something that's funny shaped, that's not a very good idea. However, my method actually involves a minimal weight dangle. So it really is a matter of judgment, and it's a matter of available space, and it's a matter of how much weight on your particular garment. So I'm going to start by saying that I have a teepee shaped drying rack. This is actually it as it's supposed to be used in a bathtub. I got it off of Amazon. I think it was like 20 or 30 bucks. I really don't remember. I'm probably not going to link it down below because you can say bathtub drying rack and you'll be able to find a whole bunch of different items that work just as well. And these were clean socks that I have in this picture. It was just to show that it's supposed to dangle. You wind up with a little bit more space before it touches the ground in a bathtub because it's on top of the edges. However, I don't set it up that way when I'm drying because that's too much weight being down too far that it's going to stretch your garments and everything. However, I tend to set it like this over a towel. And then things can dangle, and if there's too much weight, it can actually hang on the floor, so it halves the amount of weight that's actually draping. And some things this works perfectly, some things this doesn't work so well. It really depends on the need of the garment. And I do Tetris. I play like a giant life-size game of Tetris to see how things fit, how things are going to stretch, to make sure nothing stretches too much. So a couple days before Christmas, I did 3 loads of wash in my little basin. And that was, well, it was pretty boring actually, because most of it was waiting for it to dry. So this is the first load. It was a sweater and a top that I think you've seen me wear in past videos. And I just hung them over so that way they were half over. If you're going to do this, again, be careful. It worked just fine with these 2 garments because they'd both been previously blocked. This was not a true blocking for any of these. It just shows you what I do as my drying method, but this is suitable for blocking as well. And they were hung half over to dry. Now you've got to be careful, because if you let them dry for too long in this way, you can wind up with a fold line where the pressure of the garment has actually flattened some of the stitches where it's overhanging. So at some point you do need to flip them over so that they dry equally. I mean, you have to do that for anything done this way anyway, which is why not pinning is so useful. I think at this point I may or I may not have set up a fan. I think I set up the fan after I took this first picture. But by the time my second load was done, which was just one big shawl, and then I set that out in this picture, at that point I definitely had a fan going. Because if you've ever been in 2 rooms that are the exact same temperature, one has stagnant air, so the air is not moving around, and the other one has a fan or something going. They'll be the exact same temperature, but the one with the fan feels cooler. That's because moving air helps water, in our human case, sweat, evaporate, and that evaporation leaches some of the heat off of our skin. It does the same thing with blocking, and whenever you're trying to dry something, moving air helps things to dry faster because it helps with the process of evaporation. So having one, I usually have 2 fans going, but because of the Christmas tree, I really didn't have space for that or a plug on that side of the room. But it really does speed things along. So if you can't get your things super scrunched and dried, you can at least set some fans on it to help speed the process along. You can cut out about an hour or 3 or an overnight process of drying just by having fans on it. Then I needed to do a load of socks after this. So these were very small. And the cool thing with small items is that you can kind of fit them in wherever. So I didn't need a 3rd towel in this situation. I just had my giant one and a normal size one. And that was sufficient. And I was able to, I think I did, the washing was all done by about 12:30 or 1 in the afternoon, and it was dry enough by about 2 a.m. I set a few things to dry overnight that were a little bit more damp just because I really hadn't sufficiently squeezed out enough water that it took a very long time. But had I been able to get more water out, I'm pretty sure everything would have been completely dried after a midway through flip. You know, you let it go about 3 hours, then you flip everything, or you replace the towels underneath so that they're dry, which actually really helps speed the drying process along. Yeah, I didn't squeeze things very well at all. They were very drippy when I put them out there, which is why it took so long, even with the moving air. Anyway, I hope this helps you. Just to give you some ideas for ways to use some vertical space or to at least maximize the space you have. Because the cool thing is, if you've got just like a little strip by your bed and a little strip at the end of your bed, you can block there. Get two fans going in the opposite direction if you've got them, and you'll still be able to get them pretty well dry. Just because we don't have space doesn't mean we don't have the ability to properly care for our carefully crafted items. Anyway, I hope this helped. I'll see you around. Happy New Year. Bye.